Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Sunday. We have two great guests. We have Ron Dermer, Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs, in his first exclusive interview, a confidant of the Prime Minister of Israel. We also have our friend, Professor John Yoo, of Berkeley Law School, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, where we're going to dig in on this War Powers Act, because the enemy within thinks it has something and they have nothing. Look. We have a tremendous President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief, who really is exceptional. I don't know why he's underestimated. I don't know why people question the way that he goes about making decisions. But by now, hasn't he proven himself? Yes, he has. He'll go down in history as truly one of the great presidents in domestic and foreign policy. He only had one term in a few months. He's not even done. And then we have the greatest military on the face of the earth. It makes you proud, doesn't it? July 4th is coming up, Independence Day. When we look at the flag, when we have the song sung and the music played for the different military services, well, you can stand taller now with your chest out more and thank them. They are fantastic. I think it would also be a mistake, or I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the Prime Minister of Israel, also one of the greatest leaders of all time, Benjamin Netanyahu, who's just been fantastic, considering his country's surrounded and they've defeated one enemy after another, and the Israeli military and intelligence, which is really astonishing, really is quite fabulous. And what's even better is the alliance between our two countries. Let me tell you a little story quickly. Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu are friends. They have many of the same friends and enemies. Look, in our country, our government tried to take out Donald Trump. The establishment tried to take him out. They used phony crimes. They used phony civil statutes. They brought him in Democrat districts. They had judges, I would say in their back pocket ideologically, yes. And yet he muscled through and he defeated them. And you defeated them too with your vote this election. Benjamin Netanyahu has something similar going on. He's been in a criminal trial over the most inane allegations one can ever imagine. And it goes on and on and on with a hard left attorney general, a hard left prosecutorial system, and radical leftist judges, including on their Supreme Court. They have basically what is a judicial tyranny at the highest level. We have a judicial tyranny at the lowest level, but sort of leaching into the highest level. So they share the same, in many respects, enemies, obstacles, and friends. And so they're very close, despite all the leaks that you read in Axios and Politico that were pushed out there, a gap between Netanyahu and Trump, a gap between the Americans and the Israel, all lies. All lies. To show you how remarkable Donald Trump is in this instance, because we could spend all week on this. In 1996, Bill Clinton had the opportunity to blow up the North Korean nuclear site. He passed. And then suddenly in 2006, the North Koreans revealed their nuclear weapon. And since 2006, they have produced 50 nuclear missiles. And they have enough fissile material to produce a total of 90 nuclear weapons. Because Bill Clinton was a coward. Barack Obama is a coward, too. Barack Obama negotiated a deal with this Islamo-Nazi regime in Tehran, despite the fact they had slaughtered Americans, despite the fact they had committed acts of terrorism against our troops, against our civilians, and backed these proxies to do the same. He appeased them. And under his deal, in 10 years, which would be now, that regime would have a nuclear weapon with our blessing. Donald Trump comes in office and says, that's crazy. And he rips up the deal and he signs the reversal, and he handed me the pen, which is in a frame hanging on my wall in my home. Donald Trump comes back into power. He sees what? Not only did Obama sell out our country, Biden literally is subsidizing the enemy with hundreds of billions of dollars directly and through oil exports to another enemy, communist China, while he's undermining the state of Israel and smearing the Prime Minister of Israel. helps them build up this war machine. They were on their back after Donald Trump had basically choked their lifeline, their economic lifeline. He comes in now. He gets intelligence. He gets intelligence from many places. He looks at it. The vice president looks at it. The secretary of defense looks at it. Secretary of state looks at it. The director of the CIA helps present it. Other agencies too. And they go, wait a minute, these guys are a minute away. Oh, we've heard that all the time. Excuse me, these guys are a minute away. 2 weeks, they have a weapon. A crude weapon that can become very quickly a sophisticated weapon because they're also building intercontinental ballistic missiles. And he says that's not going to stand. And so he has to battle in this country two forces, the Democrats and the isolationists. He has to battle the Bernie Sanders and the AOCs who really hate our country. These are Marxist Islamists. That's what they are, Marxist Islamists. And he has to battle our isolationists who claim that they represent MAGA and that in the face of Iran building nuclear weapons and in the face of all they've done to us, page after page of the murders and the terrorism and all the rest, the assassination attempts against him for which an individual was charged just last November, we should pretend it's not happening. He says, I'm President of the United States. I'm Commander-in-Chief. I'm MAGA. I represent all the people. That will not stand. And he and his team, civilian and military, put together what is one of the greatest military acts in world history. Really. Now, you might say, well, it's not Battle of the Bulge. It's not Iwo Jima. It doesn't have to be Battle of the Bulge or Iwo Jima. He took out the nuclear sites in Iran, which could have been Hiroshima, Nagasaki against us. That's what he did. Now, a couple of things that I want to mention right now. The ifs. The Democrats, the isolationists, the media. What if? What if as a result of this? What if the Iranians attack our armed forces? What if the Iranians, their sleeper cells, attack us in the United States? What if they do this? You know what's amazing about this? They have no conception about the mindset of this enemy, of the Islamist jihadist mindset. They want to kill us, America. They want to kill us. They want to kill the West. They want to kill the Israelis. They want to kill Jews and Christians and non-compliant, from their perspective, Muslims. They're a slaughterhouse. They're a bloodlust. The people who speak this way have read nothing and understand nothing about the enemy. It doesn't matter what we do to the enemy. The enemy's going to keep coming and keep coming. Did we provoke 9/11 when they killed over 2,000 of our people? No, we didn't provoke 9/11. Did we provoke anything? No, we haven't provoked anything. All we do is try to defend ourselves. So for the crowd that says, what if, let me ask you some what ifs. If Iran continued to produce its nuclear program, do you think the other Arab nations would sit quiet? We know Saudi Arabia and the others, they have hundreds of billions of dollars. Of course they'd want to buy a nuclear military program. So proliferation in the worst, most dangerous part of the world. Can you imagine that? With terrorists everywhere. And if Iran gets nukes, what then of our military bases? You've heard, what if they shoot short-range, mid-range missiles into our military bases? And just for the record, these military bases are all in Arab countries. They're not in Israel. Well, what if they do? Of course, they may. Of course, that's what they do. But what if they had nuclear weapons? And they said, we're going to shoot a nuclear weapon into our military bases. Or what if they said, get out of the Middle East, or we're going to use our nuclear weapons against your military bases? You understand, it's the same mindset. What if they gave a nuclear weapon to the Houthis, who said, we're going to shut down the straits, we're going to shut down oil, we decide what comes and goes, all the economic activity that goes on that benefits us too, that's that. Blackmail us, threaten us, or use the weapons. What if they give a dirty bomb, now that they have the technology, to one of these sleeper cells that we talk about? What happens then? Are we going to stop all of them? So there was no option. This was it. So the isolationists, they need to admit how foolish they are and accept how foolish they are. And I feel like some of them are sitting on the edge of the chair waiting for something to happen to say, see, I told you so. See, I told you so. You haven't told us anything. In fact, you keep giving aid and comfort to the enemy with what you keep saying. Perhaps they're misreading our country because of you. Rethink what you're doing. It's dangerous, and it's irresponsible. Then we have the Democrats. No sooner had the mission been finished and accomplished with 100% perfection. They're calling for the impeachment of Donald Trump. They're claiming that he violated the Constitution of the United States, which they care very much about, as you must know. And so there they are, the reprobates, the miscreants, the malcontents, starting with AOC and Bernie Sanders, two people who hate the Constitution and hate the Republic, or they wouldn't be Marxist Islamists, would they? So they say the president violated the War Powers Act, which was passed in 1973, and my guest, John, you and I are going to discuss at some length. It was violated. He must be impeached. He's a dictator. Our military just pulled off something that is astonishing. Just saved the world, the entire world. And by the way, that includes the United States, from a nuclear Iran. And the Democrats see this as an opportunity they believe to exploit. They're the enemy within. They are the enemy within. The War Powers Act is unconstitutional, as John, you and I will discuss further. It violates separation of powers. It defangs the president as the commander-in-chief. People will throw around terms like, well, Congress issues the declaration of war. We will address that, so forth. But it is unconstitutional, and we'll get into that. But even more than that, it's unworkable. It's unworkable. I have in front of me National War Powers Commission report of several years ago. Both parties, former secretaries of state of both parties, former attorneys general of both parties, including my attorney general, Ed Meese, who was my mentor and so forth, and they claim this law was passed in haste. It's unworkable. You want a taste of this? You're going to need it, because we're going to fight this battle. We have to defeat these Democrats, these isolationists who are in Congress, the radical libertarian isolationists like Tommy Massey, Rand Paul, who claim that they know what the Constitution is when they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Section 2C of the War Powers Act very narrowly describes the president's war powers. Is that in the Constitution? No. Can Congress just pass a statute and amend the Constitution? No. Aren't we constitutionalists? 5C, Congress can order a president to remove troops who are in the middle of battle. Is that what our framers had in mind? Of course not. And they do this by statute? The Supreme Court said even that provision of the War Powers Act is utterly unconstitutional. Section 3 requires the president to consult with Congress. Well, what if he doesn't have time to consult with Congress? Like when we're attacked. Or if he consults with Congress, they leak and destroy the mission. That's super secret, like this mission never seeked. And the statute doesn't say, well, who does he consult in Congress? The Speaker? Is that good enough? Well, who does he consult? Then we have Sections 4A and Section 5 empowers Congress to literally halt a military operation. Gets worse, by inaction. So the president's required to report to Congress certain military activities. And if Congress doesn't act, he's then forced to end the military activities. Does any of that sound constitutional to you? Does any of that sound sane to you? Sane. Do you think George Washington would have agreed to this? The commander of the Revolutionary Army? No. This is what happens when you get a legislative body that can't even pass budgets, can't even balance a budget, can't even cut taxes, can't even secure a border, can't even do all these things, even though now some of these things are getting done, in war-making decisions. Yes, there is the declaration of war provision, which we'll discuss with John Yoo and so forth. And keep in mind, they bring this up at a time when the nation, real Americans, are celebrating our military, are celebrating the fact that you can sleep peacefully and quietly at night now, knowing that the Iranian terrorist Islamic Nazi regime will not get any further with its Faisal nuclear intercontinental missile program aimed straight between our eyes. It's over. They're still the enemy. Jihadis, Islamists, terrorists are still the enemy. This did not prevent that. This did not prevent their sleeper cells from acting. It hasn't prevented another 9/11. It's not going to stop them from hijacking planes and killing Jews in the Middle East and killing Americans and doing the things that they do. This one night of victory stopped their nuclear program. So they may attack our troops, but they've been attacking our troops since long before this. And for some reason, that doesn't seem to anger some of the decision makers in the Democrat parties. For some reason, it doesn't seem to anger the isolationists who talk a good game but have no plan. Donald Trump overcame all of this. But I want to put out a little warning to our Democrat friends and our isolationist friends and their friends in the corrupt media. It's not going to work. I and people like me are going to stare you down. We're going to fight you every step of the way, legally, politically, every step of the way. You're not going to take a great victory like this against a horrendous enemy that has slaughtered thousands of Americans directly and through their proxies, whose bodies are buried in military cemeteries all over this country. Civilians whose bodies are buried in cemeteries all over this country. You're not going to take this event, where we should be celebrating and thanking our great commander-in-chief in the American military, and turn it into a political opportunity for you. You don't deserve to hold power. And I want to say one thing to the Israeli people. You've been very strong. The missiles are still raining down on you. The war with Iran is not over. You heard our President of the United States say that, again, this Islamic, terrorist, Nazi regime can choose peace or, basically, annihilation. People call this regime change. I don't even know what that means. We're defending ourselves. Israel's defending itself. If there is a government that wants to destroy us or destroy them, or in fact attack our troops more and attack our people more, then apparently more needs to be done than knocking out their nuclear programs. This is another contradiction of these people. No regime change. Okay, great. But they keep attacking us. Now what? Now what? We're not looking to change the regime. If they attack us, we're looking to destroy it. And that is a good thing if you have an enemy that won't stop. I can't think of another president of the United States who would think it is a good thing to put our heads in the sand and pretend none of this is going to happen. For those in our country who are saying, what if? What if the Iranians do this? What if the Iranians do that? What about their sleeper cells? What if they attack us again? What if they do this? What if they do? You're making the case for regime change. You are. And they are. I, President of the United States, are making the case for defending our country. Big difference. Again, I just want to salute our great president, our armed forces. I cannot thank you enough. Please know the American people are thrilled. And again, I want to congratulate the Israelis and their prime minister for being strong and tough as they still duke it out with that Iranian terrorist Nazi regime.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.